Okay, so let's talk about Iran. Right now, there's a battle being fought that's not just on the streets. It's a war of words, happening in the headlines. We're figuring out the truth. Well, that's become the real challenge. So we're going to break down what's actually going on.
No mercy. Executions coming. Wow. I mean, that was the hardline message coming out of Iran. It was a direct shot back at U.S. claims that the regime was maybe, backing down. And this, right here, is a perfect example of the information war we're going to get into, a conflict where what people say is a weapon, and the real story on the ground gets lost in all the noise.
All right, Section 1, protests erupt in Iran. So to really get a handle on this whole war of words, we've got to start at the beginning. What was the spark that lit this fire?
So, look at this timeline. It all kicked off on December 28th, starting with protests about economic problems, people struggling to make ends meet. But it didn't stay that way for long. Just days later, it completely exploded into calls to end clerical rule. And now, we're looking at the deadliest unrest the country has seen since the Islamic Revolution back in 1979. It's a massive escalation, and it happened fast.
Okay, next up, a transatlantic war of words. As you can imagine, as things got more intense on the ground, the rest of the world started paying very close attention. And that led to a very public, very direct showdown between Washington and Tehran.
So, you had the U.S. President Donald Trump come out and say Iran canceled the hanging of over 800 people. The message was clear. American pressure was working. The claim was that their intervention had directly led to this huge stop in executions.
But then, Iran's response? It was immediate and blunt. That claim is false. And boom, right there, that's the core of this whole information war. You've got two powerful governments presenting two totally opposite realities to the world. Who do you believe?
And believe me, it didn't stop with that one claim. The disagreement goes way deeper. Iran's supreme leader came out and accused the U.S. president of being a criminal who was personally stirring up the unrest with armed groups. And on the other side, the U.S. basically said it was time to look for new leadership in Iran and told protesters to keep fighting. I mean, that's pretty much calling for regime change, right?
All right, let's move on. This battle of words gets even more intense when we start talking about the most tragic part of all of this, the human cost. And this is where it really becomes a fight over the numbers. So that leads to a pretty straightforward question, right? How many people have actually died? Well, it seems like a simple question, but the answer is anything but. The numbers being thrown around are worlds apart. Okay, just look at this table. The differences are just wild. You've got an Iranian regional official saying it's around 5,000. Then you have reports from outside the country putting the number as high as 20,000. Even Iran's supreme leader just kind of vaguely says several thousand. With a gap that huge, it's almost impossible to understand the real scale of what's happened.
So we've talked about the politics, we've talked about these crazy conflicting numbers, but behind all of that, of course, are real people, real families. Let's talk about what this is actually like for those who are caught right in the middle of it.
One of the biggest challenges is the internet blackouts. The government has used these to try and control the narrative, but what it really does is obscure everything. It's a key tactic, and it has this absolutely devastating effect of trapping witnesses and families in total silence, right when they need to connect the most.
We genuinely have no idea what's happening. I mean, just let that sink in. That one sentence from someone with family in Iran, it just perfectly captures the absolute terror and uncertainty that so many families are feeling. They're just desperate for any scrap of information. And this is what their day-to-day looks like. They're frantically searching for loved ones, combing through lists of the dead or missing. They're hearing these awful stories about relatives being hurt in the crackdowns. Eyewitnesses are describing security forces just shooting protesters. They're living, as they say, on the edge of their seats, caught in this constant, exhausting cycle of hope and despair.
So, where are we now? What does the future look like? Well, things on the ground have definitely shifted, but the tension, that's still incredibly high. It's like a quiet standoff.
Yeah, the streets might seem quieter now. The violent crackdown seems to have put a stop to the massive protests, for now at least. But the crisis itself? Oh, it's far from over. All those underlying problems and that big international standoff, it's all still simmering right below the surface.
And then there's this quote that just hangs over everything. You have someone with family in Iran recalling that the U.S. president said, "Help was on the way." It was this promise of intervention,
but it's so vague, so undefined, and for a lot of people, that's deeply, deeply concerning.
Which brings us to the big, unresolved question at the very heart of this crisis. What does that help even mean? What does it look like? And nobody seems to know the answer. So for the people of Iran, and really for the rest of the world watching, the only thing that's certain right now is that nothing is certain at all.